So in today's webinar, Mark is going to talk us through his journey of becoming a chief exec and a leader of an industry which is known to be a challenging one. He's going to share his tips for success in making that transition to a CEO and how he stepped up to the role. So Mark, thank you very much, and over to you.
Thanks, Suzanne. Afternoon, everybody. Thank you for tuning in and listening to me today. What I'm going to do is talk about, as Suzanne said, talk about my experiences in the pub trade and a little bit about building up a pub business. And I'm going to relate that back to the pub industry over the last 10 or 15 years, the time that I've been involved in it, because it has changed enormously over that period. And then I suppose really I'm going to present in two halves. The first half will really be about the sort of early years in our business, some of the challenges we had, and the point that relates to with the pub industry was really when it was in a very good shape. And then the second half I'm going to talk about us as we developed as a business when we actually became quite mature and established, and some of the new challenges that faced us from that point onwards. So my interest in pubs was kind of sparked in the sort of early mid 1990s. I was very fortunate to grow up in a lovely rural village on the outskirts of Reading, and we were quite remote. We had a village pub about a mile away called the George and Dragon, and it was a real dive. And actually so much so it was always known as locally as the shit and shovel, and it was one of those places that you know, you would try and get a beer in with some fake ID when you were sort of 16 or 17. And then one day some guys came along, they bought the pub, and they painted it salmon pink inside, tidied it up, and relaunched it as a quality pub. A lot of Antipodean staff, and actually essentially what they provided was great food, great service in fun, friendly, and in sort of relaxing environment. And it always resonated with me. And from that point onwards, I really had a love of pubs and the pub market, and it sort of always stayed in the back of my heart that it was something that I really wanted to consider getting into. Personally, I had a hospitality, or I studied hospitality at university, and then had a 4 or 5 year start to my career as a graduate. Worked for 1 or 2 big corporates in the UK, and did a couple of years over in the United States. And it was kind of when I got to the end of, I suppose, the end of my tether with that process or that career, in that I realised that there was a real lack of passion in the event catering and corporate catering industry, and like I say, that love for pubs had always been inside of me, and I just decided to quit the corporate life and set something up on my own. So in 2004, I set up Reading Leisure, and of course you may remember that the country was in a very different place back then, and the pub industry certainly was. We had a Labour government in place. The economy was really booming. Unemployment was very, very low, and we had good growth every year. So the economy was in good shape. And actually, so was the pub industry. Pub numbers were pretty solid. 97, there was 60,600, and 5 years later, by 2002, there'd be a very marginal decline of 500 pubs. But at that same time, beer volumes, MAT is a moving annual total of beer volumes. This is essentially the amount of beer that is sold through the on-trade in the UK, or through pubs in the UK, was rising. So the market was in a relatively strong position, and certainly the pub sector was in a strong position. When we joined, or when we started in 2004, we started with this little cute little rundown pub in the village of Charlwood near Gatwick Airport, and it was a very, very hard industry to get into if you wanted a freehold pub. And by freehold, I mean you own the bricks and mortar of the property, because there were two big companies that were essentially buying up all of the freeholds in the UK. So it was a very, very difficult market to get into. So at the time that we had formed, generally pubs were fairly average. It kind of was the start of the gastro pub revolution that kind of took a grip in the UK. There's definitely change was underway back then, and suddenly food, design, service all became very, very important key components to a good pub. And actually the pub market had started really for the first time to recognise that women and families were a key part of, or a key market, and if pubs were to be successful, then they should be catered to well. As I said, the freeholds were very, very thin on the ground, very hard to attain. So most people went into the pub trade by buying a lease or a tenancy. And there's nothing wrong with a lease or a tenancy, but most leases in the UK, you have to take a tied lease, which means the landlord is not only your landlord in a traditional sense where you pay them their rent, you also have to purchase your beer through them, and you do that at a higher price, actually a price that's pretty much double market value. So, and that's quite a controversial model. It's come under scrutiny lately, interestingly. But actually, one of the things it does do is it allows people to enter the market very cheaply. And we had a very clear vision from the start that we didn't just want to run one pub, two pubs. We wanted to have a group of pubs, a family of pubs. So I was very, very keen to build our group from one pub to four pubs. So we could sit above them and run them as a sort of proper managed business. Just flicking back to the industry in 2004, as I said earlier, there's about 60,000 pubs in the UK, and in 2004, 29,000 were owned by one of two companies. And I controversially like to call these guys the bad boys, but the two companies were Enterprise Inns and Punch Taverns. And essentially, they were both former brewers, but were now just property companies. And generally, they were pretty out of touch with consumers' demands. They weren't really interested in the local communities that those pubs were operated within, and they were just trying to find people like us to go in, lease a pub from, and pay the rent and pay their loaded beer prices. Well, that's all well and good when times are really strong, but unfortunately, that model is not particularly sustainable. It means that people that are leasing these pubs have to work incredibly hard to make a living out of it. So we essentially, by 2007, had built our business up to 4 pubs actually, and they were all good pubs in good areas, and certainly pubs that should be thriving. We were working incredibly hard, but we realised that they needed huge investment. They needed huge investment to improve the design, the appeal, the ambience, the fixtures, the fittings, and that investment is very, very hard to make when you are running a lease, when it's a lease business that isn't particularly profitable, because banks and financial institutions, well, firstly, they're not particularly keen on pubs, and secondly, they certainly don't like lease pubs. So we had 4 pubs. They were operating okay. We were working very, very hard, but they weren't really making any money, and we recognised that we really needed to change this. And the only real way of doing that was to buy the freehold of the pubs that we had. Okay, so just relating that or taking that forward. So by 2007, we had 4 pubs in our group. And some of you may remember that 2007 wasn't a great year for pubs for a couple of key reasons, really. First and foremost, the smoking ban came in, and that really changed the dynamic of pubs. You know, pubs traditionally have always been pillars of communities where people went to essentially drink and socialise. In the 90s and late 2000s, as I said already, pubs were starting to change, and they were looking at design and a more family-friendly market, and they were having to change. But the smoking ban really kind of solidified that position. And although, as the industry looks back on it 10 years on, almost to the day now, it's seen as a very positive thing. At the time, it was a really, really tough thing to swallow. And the other thing in 2007 was that we had a very, very poor year of weather, particularly in the south of England. We had a lot of flooding in the summer, in June and July, and of course that is one of the peak periods for pubs trading. So it was a really, really, really tough year. And of course, you know, we know what happened in 2008. You know, the recession took hold, and that really caused you know, some problems in the pub market. However, there were already some cracks showing at that time. I said already that between 97 and 2002, the pub market had marginally declined from 60,500 to just over 60,000. And by 2007, that decline had increased to 58,500 pubs. And then between 2007 and 2012, that decline had really started to pick up pace, and there was an 8% drop in pub numbers. In beer volumes, if you remember earlier, I said these were increasing. Well, suddenly over that period, there was a huge decline in beer volumes, and there were some key reasons behind this. But one of the main reasons was a thing called the beer duty escalator that the Labour government brought in, and essentially that raised tax on beer at a really quite aggressive rate. So in 2002, we only had 28 pence in a pint was tax. By 2012, that had nearly doubled to 52 pence in a pint. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it's an 85% increase in 10 years, and of course that's never going to be sustainable. So in 2002, the average cost of a pint was £2 and a penny, but 10 years later, that had gone up to £3 and 9 pence, a 53% increase. So there was real pressure on the industry. So was the credit crunch a disaster? No, it wasn't, because as I kind of alluded to earlier, the two big companies, Punch Taverns and Enterprise Inns, were basically forced to dispose of a lot of their pubs. They had grown very aggressively in the 90s and the early 2000s, and they had bought just about every freehold pub that was on the market. And of course, that was all geared against pretty high debt levels. And suddenly, they had people like us working very, very hard in their tied leased pubs, who were making no money. And so a lot of those lessees simply decided to walk away from the industry and gave the keys back of their pubs. And that caused them a real problem paying their interest payments on their high debt. And essentially they were forced to sell a lot of their pubs. So in 2004 they had 29,000 pubs between them, and by last year that number had dropped to 8,500, which is a pretty big shift. So has that been a bad thing? No, it's been really good, because actually what's happened, it's meant a lot of smaller operators like Redness Leisure have come into the industry and have purchased pubs freehold. So that means really they now have their destiny is in their own hands. And not only have they managed to buy the freeholds, they've actually bought them at really quite a good price, very undervalued, because most of these pubs were sold in the peak of the recession. It's really good for the industry because essentially it pushes the quality up. All of a sudden, the smaller operators like us that have come into the market have are far more in tune with the customers, they're far more in touch with trends and customers' needs and demands. And actually, we care a lot more about communities than these other big companies did. So essentially, the quality has really gone through the roof, both in terms of food, service, design, atmosphere, ambience. And although the overall number of pubs continues to drop, albeit at a much slower rate, actually the overall the pubs that are left, I think, are generally producing far better quality pubs than we had sort of 10 or so years ago. So it was good for us. We were able to buy 3 of the 4 pubs we had at the time from Punch Taverns, and the 4th one we disposed of, and it allowed us to essentially start to expand our estate and make some huge investments into our pubs. And actually, we did this in 2009. We started investing in our pubs in 2010. All of a sudden, we were able to get access to finance from traditional bank debt. And between 2010 and 2013, we doubled our turnover, but actually we didn't grow the number of pubs that we had. So it just shows the importance of having good quality fittings, furniture, toilets, ambience, etc. Okay, so I kind of always refer to this as the Great Escape, because we were very, very close to to losing the business at one point. As I said, we were working incredibly hard in the earlier years, and we really weren't making any profit out of it. As you can see, in 2008 we were turning over about £1.5 million, and we were near enough breaking even or making a small loss. And despite working very, very hard at those pubs between 2004 and 2010, we really weren't able to increase our sales by any notable period. We started investing heavily into the pubs in 2010, and as you can see, our turnover just went through the roof, and obviously our profit followed that. So we really were quite fortunate. I think we also recognised that the market was changing and that we had to change as a business as well. We had survived the early years, and looking back, it was a huge learning curve, and I knew that I never wanted to go through that again. I never wanted those sleepless nights or that feeling in the pit of my stomach where we were really sweating over money. So I think, in summary, that sort of first half, that first chapter for us, it was a huge learning curve. It taught us a lot. We were probably a little young and naive, but at the same time, it certainly stood us in good stead, because by the end of that period, by the time we got to 2011, 12, 13, we knew exactly what to do to make our pubs work, and essentially we just had to work out how we were going to do it. So essentially, we needed a strategy, and of course, that then brought new chapter, new challenges along with us. So all of a sudden, instead of living hand to mouth on a week-to-week basis, we realised that we had new challenges ahead of us. We needed a proper grown-up strategy. We needed access to continual finance. We wanted a growth plan. As the company got bigger, and myself and my main business partner stepped back from the day-to-day running of the pubs, retention became more of a challenge, as we were sort of less able to interact with staff on a daily basis. Actually, just the whole process of change is quite a daunting thing for staff, especially those that had been around myself and my other partner Mark for the earlier years. It was a bit daunting for them that suddenly we were backing away. I suppose for me, I was always the sort of MD in the business, but probably in reality, I'd never really performed as one. And so I'm just going to talk through one or two of the things that we did then, or I did then, that actually I look back on, and they were very, very key to our success today. First and foremost, I put some structure into the business, and we created a proper board. We had a board before, we had some directors, but we didn't act as a board of directors. We didn't meet on a regular basis. It was very ad hoc. So I put real structure into the business and made sure that our board met once a month, that we had a clear agenda to discuss things, and that we actually made key strategic decisions around that table. I suppose at that point it kind of allowed me to step above the business and really start working on it and not in it on a day-to-day basis. A little later down the line, we formed a second tier of senior management, which we refer to as our senior management team, and our board then developed a 5-year strategy, which we're actually coming to the end of now. And below our board, we put all the relevant infrastructure that we needed to put in place to make sure that we could deliver our strategy. And I think it also, it actually, probably for the first real time in our business, it created a solid accountability. People knew what their responsibilities were, and they suddenly had to become accountable. As part of our strategy and our moving forward, we created a vision, a mission, and some clear values. So our vision was really about us understanding as a board what it is we were trying to achieve, where we were trying to go, and cascading that information down to the rest of our pub managers, our senior managers, and our team. And actually, this has been a really, really useful exercise for us, because even though our board all kind of had the same intentions in our head, we all kind of knew what we were trying to achieve. Actually, this just joined it together, creating a vision and a mission. Really, really combined that well. It made sure we were all on the same page. And then, of course, our values were at the end of that, and that really dictates how we want our staff to behave, our managers to behave, and all of us to behave. We created what we call a roadmap, which is a one-page strategy, which we still look at every board meeting, because writing a 5-year strategy, I ended up with a 15-20-page document, which is all very well and good, but it's not the sort of thing you look up on a regular basis. So we put that onto a visual one-page strategy. It just pulls out the key parts of our growth, key parts of our strategy over the next few years. And this essentially has 3 years, the next 3 years mapped out in front of us, and it's a fluid document. It changes, or certainly gets amended and updated every month, and it's reviewed at our board meetings. Okay, one of the other things we did in our business was set up what we call the Red Mist Academy. Being in the pub industry, it's very labour intensive. Our biggest cost is by far and away our labour. About 35% of our sales is spent on people and the cost of people. And we could see there were cracks opening up. As we sort of became more elevated in the company, we were less able to touch people and cuddle people and look after people in the same way that we had when we started the business. So all of a sudden, we weren't retaining people as well as we once were. Our engagement of our staff was not so good, and so we set up the Red Mist Academy, which was really an initiative aimed at better recruiting, retaining, training, developing, and looking after our team. And it's come in a number of different initiatives. I think we set it up about 3 years ago now. Notoriously, we're in a fairly transient industry for people anyway, but if you don't, of course, create the right workplace, the right environment for them, then that becomes unbelievably transient, and you really lose your consistency. Consistency is key to running a good pub, and of course, to be consistent, you need to retain your staff. And there's a number of different elements and initiatives that form part of the academy. We have an online, a very sophisticated and effective online training platform, which is really, really great. All of our staff now have to complete a number of modules before they're allowed to step into one of our pubs. We have a proper induction session, which is held with me and another senior team in our office every couple of weeks, and again, everybody has to go through that before they're allowed to work in the pubs. We have become very open and transparent, so we've published all of the pay rates in the company. We have a really, really effective staff Facebook group, which is essentially what was probably the staff notice board of the 1990s. Facebook, this closed Facebook group, has become our interactive staff notice board of the current day, and it's incredibly effective. We run a lot of competitions through there, and it's humorous, fun, but professional, and people get really engaged with it. We run a very, very generous pension scheme, or certainly in relation to the rest of our industry, we put that in place and put some good resource behind it. And then we have a number of other smaller things, such as health insurance, a great employee of the month program that we call Shining Stars, and one or two other things. So the academy has become great. It's actually gotten to the point now where it's always sat under my control, where I actually, partly I don't have the time for it, and partly it needs someone new to take it on and manage it. It needs a dedicated resource, and so we're currently in the process of recruiting a specialised people manager that's going to hopefully take this on to the next level. But what it has done, it's reduced our annual staff turnover by 28%, which is pretty significant in our industry. Certainly more we can do on that front. One of the other initiatives that we did was launched a loyalty scheme called Red Card Rewards. And as you can imagine, we have a lot of customers that come through the pubs on a daily basis. And in January 2014, we launched a loyalty scheme. When I checked last month, we had 27,000 users on it, and it grows by about 1,000 users, active users each month. It's a very simple scheme. Customers get a point for every £1 that they spend, and they're given a card, and it works on contactless RFID technology, the same technology that you get in a bank card or an Oyster card. And like I say, customers get a point for every £1 they spend, and then when they reach certain point targets, they are given an electronic £10 voucher onto their account. They also get a £10 voucher just for signing up, and they get one every year on their birthday. So it's a very simple scheme, but it really is very effective. And if I show you these charts, you'll see why. Customers who come into a pub for a transaction could be anything from a packet of crisps or a pint of beer to a 3-course meal. If they are on our loyalty scheme, then they will spend £49.85 on average, and if they are not on our loyalty scheme, they will spend on average £28.96. So huge difference. And when we give them a reward, i.e. they are now using a voucher, and it doesn't matter whether it's £10 or £100 worth of vouchers, they can store them up and use them all at once if they want. When they come in and use a reward, they spend £59.86 in addition to the vouchers, and without a voucher it's £35.39. So it's pretty significant, and so much so in 2016 we gave up £210,000 worth of vouchers and had a 73% redemption rate. So for us, loyalty is really, really key, and I just think the subliminal message behind it is so important, and I guess that's why a lot of the big brands and retailers do it, and certainly it's probably our most effective marketing tool. Another one of the key things we did is that we introduced KPIs, which I know doesn't sound particularly revolutionary, but as I said earlier, consistency is absolute key to running good pub, and this is a case of kind of what gets measured gets done, and it's allowed our pubs to remain very, very focused, and actually the operational criteria, the operational KPIs, has actually formed part of our managers' bonus criteria. So every month they are judged against their key performance indicators, and they're given a red, yellow or green rating, and that is just tabularized, and then they're ranked according to their pub. and it gets unbelievably competitive between the pubs, which is great, a little bit of healthy competition. And certainly when we review this at our monthly meetings with our pub managers, they certainly don't want to be sitting there with lots of red cells. They want to have a clean sweep of green. So actually introducing KPIs, several of which are assessed externally or by independent people, then so they have real credibility to them. It's been a really effective tool for us. So lastly, I think for me, one of the other things that I've really gleaned in probably transitioning from being an MD to a CEO is the value of external input. And that's come in the form of TAB for me. I know my facilitator, Leslie's listening along, and you know, he's been phenomenal on the journey that I've had to developing as a person and helping us develop as a business. The TAB board are very, very supportive. They keep me certainly very focused and on track. And of course, they make sure I'm accountable for the strategy that I've put forward and the commitments I've made. It's actually given me a lot of confidence in my own ability and my own opinions, and it's challenged a lot of my thinking and given me some really honest and impartial feedback. So it's been a huge benefit to me, and something that I just wouldn't be without now. And it's had some real influence over key strategic decisions that we've made, and certainly I believe that our business has really grown because you know, because I've grown. And I think going forward, you know, my main driving critical success factor is to get our business to a turnover of £10 million by the end of 2018. We have, and hopefully with a conversion of 10% to profit. We've got 2 new pubs. We had a new pub open in May, but we have 2 new pubs opening in the next 9 months. And actually, I think we're well on track to achieve that. So, in summary, we've gone from a small cluster of pubs to an established, successful business. But certainly, our journey has been a challenging and bumpy one along the way, in actually a very, very changing market. I think personally, I've grown from becoming, I suppose, just a manager to an MD to a CEO, and I know the company has grown because I have. People are certainly key in our business, as I've touched on earlier with the Red Mist Academy initiative, and there is no doubt that happy staff make happy customers. TAB, I've talked about the value of TAB, and I think impartial advice and guidance is valuable. And probably just lastly, I think you know, the first part of our journey where we're very close to failure, it has been actually a key learning curve for me, or a key learning point for me, because it can be, it frightens you enough to know you never want to be back there again, and it can be a great platform for success. So hopefully you've enjoyed that, and if anybody has any questions, then I'll very gladly will answer them.